I want to focus our thoughts and hearts today on the second reading, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 8 to 14, and in particularly verse 10, and also just Jesus in the gospel, but more generally about the work of Jesus in our lives. But when things come to my mind, if I don't do them right away, they evaporate and I forget about them. So I have some business to take care of. Laurel?
Yes, Father.
Would you take a memo, please, to Oregon Catholic Press? You need to tell them that Father Chuck here at this parish, I have a suggestion for an adaptation of one of their more well-known hymns, Christ Be Our Light, by Bernadette Farrell. So I know she's in England, so they're going to have to somehow contact her. So I want to suggest, you'll do that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I want to suggest changing the refrain. And it goes like this, my adaptation. Christ be our interventional radiologist. Pulse through our hearts, X-ray the darkness. Christ be our interventional radiologist. Irradiate your church gathered today. Okay, so I'm sure now Laura wouldn't say this because I'm her boss, but I'm sure she's thinking, and you're thinking, Father, stay in your lane, right? So, interventional radiologist. So we have this image of Jesus being the divine physician, and we see him today doing some healing, physical healing, but of course it's meant to be symbolic. I mean, it's a real healing of real blindness, but it's meant to be symbolic of Jesus healing our spiritual blindness, or helping us get rid of our blind spots. But the specialty within healthcare of interventional radiology has been on my mind actually for several reasons. One is because we actually have an interventional radiologist in our parish and in our midst. And even at Mass this morning, eBay is an interventional radiologist. And it's very well connected to us being up here on Markham Hill, this medical hill, that the closest medical building to us, right across that first parking lot on the corner of 6th Avenue Drive and Gaines, that building is the Charles Dotter, D-O-T-T-R, the Charles Dotter Memorial Institute for Interventional Radiology, because he did, I think, the first, at least he's credited as doing one of the first operations using radiology. I mean, we popularly say X-rays, but it's more sophisticated than that. But using it was back in January 1964, apparently, that he tried to using X-ray technology to be able to see deep beneath the external surface and to see where some operation or procedure needed to be done without then having to cut the person all up, and do all this stuff that they do to our bodies in surgery. So we're very well connected to interventional radiology, which that's what that is. It's using, I'll say popularly speaking, X-rays, but I'm sure it's more complicated than that, both to see beneath the surface like we normally are used to with X-rays, but then also to combine it with, I think, seeing where to go and maybe even using intense radiology to do some of the incising or the burning off of tumors and the like. Hope that's close enough. Okay. eBay is shaking his head, yes, for those of you listening to the audio. So that's what Jesus does. He shines his light of truth and mercy and righteousness and goodness into our hearts to get beneath the surface and to show what needs to be healed. And then the intense light, also similar to, a laser surgery for our eyes, which is very fitting, and other uses of lasers to do surgery, to use light to find and cut out or burn off or excise things that need to be gotten rid of from within us. We can see that spiritually. That's what the Lord does. He cuts through with his light in his wisdom and love and mercy, and then helps us even to increase our self-awareness of things in our lives that need to be transformed or excised or burnt off. But on the other hand, this idea of radiology is not just to find illnesses and things that are wrong in the medical field, and then for us, spiritually speaking and personally speaking, having God help us grow in our self-awareness of what needs to be transformed, what needs to be burned away with the intensity of God's light. So it's not just looking for weaknesses and illness and sin, but there's also, say, like in archaeology and in art history and the like, their use of radiology, that they would use that, they might see, for instance, a painting might have one thing that was painted in the 1800s or something, but it might have been painted over some other painting that was done by, Rembrandt, something like that. And they'll use x-rays to see beneath that first surface to see what's really there. Or they might use an x-ray at, in Egyptian tombs to see through the stone and see beneath it a treasure within. And that's another way of letting ourselves be blessed by the light of Christ, is for him to help us see within ourselves the treasure, the gifts, the strengths that are within us that we ourselves may have lost sight of or might not realize. And also to help us then with that same sight, radiological sight of Christ, to see through the surface of others and to see their treasure within and to see what is good, what is the fundamental dignity of each person, to see past the things that may have accumulated in relationships, that we might be more annoyed or angry or bitter towards some person. But God wants to shine his light, in this case, being an archaeological radiologist, and helping us to see deep into the good of that person, or the value and the dignity of that person, or their strengths and the like. So I invite us to think of that image of Jesus, his subspecialty of interventional radiology, and also the idea of archaeological radiology, for him to help us see, yes, what does need to be changed, transformed, excised, burned away in us. But if we look at others, and also to have a healthy sense of self, see with God's sight into our own lives, into the lives of others, to see their value and their dignity. And in doing that, then, I propose and suggest we would be leading lives that are pleasing to God, pleasing to the Lord. And that brings me back then to the verse I mentioned, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 10, where in our translation it says, "Try to learn what is pleasing to the Lord." I looked that up in the Greek original because I was fascinated by the try to learn. I thought St. Paul was being easy on us and being nice and kind of taking off the emphasis and the pressure, you might say. Well, it turns out this translator was being nice. There's a whole bunch of translations of this verse that they say things like, try to discern, try to learn what is pleasing to God. But going back to the original Greek, some of you may know this reference from Star Wars and the sage advice of Yoda. When you go to the Greek, there is no try, okay? I mean, literally, there is no try in the Greek. It just, St. Paul just says, discerning what is pleasing to the Lord. And so, if you bear with me on this, in our English translations, many of them, including this one, they make two sentences out of this. Live as children of light, For light produces every kind of goodness and righteousness and truth, period. And our translation says, try to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. But in the Greek, it's one sentence, or actually one part of a sentence. And the try to learn just says learn, or discern, or figure out. And it's a participle. So it's modifying the live as children of light. So St. Paul, cut out the middle part of that phrase, what St. Paul says in the Greek is, live as children of the light, discerning what is pleasing to the Lord. But the Greek word is actually well-pleasing to the Lord, or to God. Well-pleasing. That can and should call to mind, or I'll remind you, just a few, whenever we recently had the Transfiguration as the reading. Remember what God says to Peter, James, and John about Jesus? This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. It's the same root of the word that's in here. So it really ought to be translated, try, if you want to say to try, learn what is well pleasing to the Lord. But we don't have to rely on ourselves only to do that. In each of our own lives, day in and day out, moment to moment, I invite you to ask the Lord to help you learn what is well-pleasing to Him by letting Him be your interventional radiologist, to help us do some deep, honest self-assessment and to see it as bringing out the treasure within us that God wants to polish and bring to the surface, as well as the medical metaphor of Jesus maybe needing to excise and burn off some things through his laser light of truth and self-awareness for us. Oregon Catholic Press and the composer of Christ Be Our Light, Bernadette Farrell, probably won't be too interested in my adaptation of her song, but I invite us to think about that, to ask Christ to be our light that shines through like an X-ray, to show what needs to be burned off and to show what needs to be polished and brought to the surface, that we not only can discern, but can put into action in our lives what is well-pleasing to God.